Happy New Year and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Conversations with Alan. On Saturday, October 7th, the Palestinian militant group Hamas launched a brutal, surprise terrorist attack on the people of Israel during the Sabbath and the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, as well as on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Crossing the border into several towns in southern Israel, these Hamas fighters brutally killed more than 1,300 innocent Israeli men, women, and children, and 27 U.S. citizens. Hamas kidnapped 240 hostages, including some of our very own citizens here in the United States. On that Saturday, they massacred over 250 people attending the Supernova Music Festival, as well as murdered, raped, and kidnapped men, women, and children living on the Kfar Aza Kibutz. The harrowing stories are endless and are almost too much to bear. People from 23 countries were killed by Hamas, and as of today, approximately 110 hostages have been freed and 5 hostages have been killed, 3 of them mistakenly by the Israeli Defense Force. I am the child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and I created Conversations with Alan to have open and honest discussions about the rise of anti-Semitism we are witnessing around the world. Joining me tonight from Israel is my high school friend and classmate, Hannah Finkelstein Schwartz, and her 24-year-old son, Matan, who is currently serving in the Israeli Defense Force. Matan will attend university once the war is over. Hannah, like myself, is also the child of 2 Holocaust survivors and spent time living on a kibbutz herself after high school. She has now been living in Israel for over 30 years. Tonight, they will share their story and tell us what it has been like living in Israel before, on, and after October 7th. Matan had finished his military service about a year and a half ago, but has been called up to return to serve his country in the ongoing war with Hamas. I want to remind everyone watching that more Jewish people were murdered on October 7th than on any day since the Holocaust ended 78 years ago. And anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world with staggering numbers. Never again is happening right now, right before all of our eyes. Please help me welcome my friend Hannah and her son Matan Schwartz to Conversations with Alan. Hannah, Matan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Alan. It was so nice to hear from you a few immediately after October 7th, but it's been it's really nice to have this opportunity to sit down and talk with you.
Well, seriously, I think I had reached out shortly after your birthday in November, and we have not seen or spoken to each other in decades. But we know, I think we both know how important this subject is of anti-Semitism and what is happening in your country right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I'd love, Hannah, for you and I to just start talking about our experiences growing up in Richfield. It's interesting. We both came from Holocaust survivors, but I don't recall ever speaking about it to you or to really anyone else during that period of my life. Do you?
No, for sure. We never spoke about it. In fact, when you told me, when we first spoke to each other over a month ago, I was actually surprised. And I thought either my memory's going or I don't ever remember sitting and having a conversation with you. Because I do remember we talked about it before, like one other family friend, and you mentioned a family friend. And other than that, we were the token Jewish kids in school, but never about being children of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I backstage, I showed you that picture, that just was posted on a Growing Up Richfield page about a Jewish group celebrating Hanukkah in 1968. And my sister's there on the far left. I never could have imagined that there was a Jewish group in Richfield.
No, me neither. And in fact, I'm going to check with my siblings, my older siblings, because not when I was growing up, that's for sure.
Me either, for sure. You described feeling different in high school. Can you talk about the conflict that you felt?
Yeah, I don't know how much of it was a conflict. It was more of an awareness, I think. high school's a time anyway when, we're testing the boundaries and exploring. And I remember that feeling very much part of teenage rituals and fun and the social experiences with our friends and our community. But always in the back of my head, there was the sense of, don't go too far. There was a sense of responsibility. I felt that I didn't want to do anything that might embarrass my parents or worry them or cause any kind of worry or concern on their part, because I always felt that I had to protect them. There was always, ever since I've been little, this sense of protectiveness, and I had to be a little bit more responsible, a little bit more aware always about my surroundings. It wasn't anything overt, but it was always sort of subconsciously inside of me. So I remember in high school, that sort of that conscience that you have, like, should I, shouldn't I? There was always in the back of my mind the consequences of, well, what would it mean for them if I do this and I get caught? Or what would it mean for them if I do this and they don't want me to, So that was more of the issue. But as far as identity, I balanced it out. My family, we were connected to a synagogue in Fort Lee. There were no synagogues in Ridgefield because there weren't any Jewish families really. So I guess preparing for my bat mitzvah and stuff when I was 12, and then going to Jewish summer camps. So I kind of had that balance of a Jewish life, but it was almost this double life. I had, one day a week I would go to youth group and I would hang out with my friends, and then Saturday on synagogue. But then the rest of the week I was with everybody in Ridgefield. And I would be, going to my friends' homes for Christmas and Easter Sunday on Easter egg hunts and things like that. So I kind of felt like I had the best of both worlds.
It's interesting, because I remember not wanting to go to Hebrew school for, preparing for my bar mitzvah. I envy a little the Jewish summer camp, because I have, in the ongoing years, met so many wonderful Jewish friends who spent summers at Jewish summer camp and have this, great extended Jewish family from it. And I think that must be such a blessing for you.
Yeah, I have to say, although, we're all scattered around the world, I feel like my camp friends and my experiences from growing up in the youth movement and Young Judea youth movement really played a huge role in who I am today. My Jewish identity, for sure, it connected me with Israel, because a lot of that time in the summer was spent on learning all about Israel and connecting me to history, Jewish history, and the history of Zionism and things like that. So it definitely helped. It had a huge impact on my identity as a Jewish girl, woman, and for sure, I wouldn't have come to Israel had I not gone to summer camp. That's for sure. And now, and now look.
Yeah, I mean. And birthright, I wish that existed when we were younger. My God, I know. Envy those young kids who have had that incredible opportunity to come to Israel and see it through that organization.
Yeah, Matan, actually, he can tell you a bit about his post high school. Before he started the army, he did a gap year program in Israel, and his particular program was half Israelis and half Americans. Oh, and wow. So that too was, it's a great opportunity. It's really, they have so many different options for young Americans who want to come and connect with Israel in so many different ways, either through volunteerism or through learning or travel or work or internships. It's wonderful.
Well, it's so interesting you talk about that. I think if I would tell any family, definitely put your young child in a summer camp, and if they could go to birthright, because I do feel I don't know enough about my heritage, and part of that was, I think, growing up in a non-Jewish world, really, in high school or in that period.
I often wonder, I mean, besides the obvious of having parents who are Holocaust survivors, so there was always a very strong, it wasn't a surprise to my family, to my mother, when I said I'm going to live in Israel. There was always a sense of, this is part of who we are and part of our heritage. And especially after the Holocaust, like, it made sense that this that this is a place where all Jews can live free and safely. But it was more of it was a great opportunity for me to really understand and enrich my identity as a whole.
That's terrific. Talk to me about your parents' Holocaust stories, if you can share a little of it.
Sure. So both of my parents were child survivors. My mother was born in Poland, and Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. She was 6 years old. She lived in an open ghetto for 2 years before being hidden. My grandfather was a grain merchant. And when the war broke out and they knew that they were going to be liquidating the ghettos, one of his former farmers said he would agree to hide him and his family, which was unusual. And so they went and lived in a very small portion of his barn that was sort of disconnected from everything else, hidden. And they lived there for 22 months. My mother was 9 years old when they went into hiding there. And they lived a life of where they had no food pretty much and no access to the outside world. And they were constantly living in danger of being found out or the farmer giving them up. But eventually they survived. They were liberated when Russia invaded Poland. They were liberated. And then eventually they moved to Munich. They lived in Krakow in Poland for 2 years after the war. And then they moved to Munich. And my mom went to school for the first time at the age of 11 and a half. And she lived in Munich until she and her family, they had a choice either to come to Israel or to go to America. And my grandmother had one surviving relative, a sister who lived in New York. And so they went to America. And my dad was born in Lithuania, and his family, they were declared when Stalin invaded Lithuania, I think it was also 1941, they were sent. They were arrested as political prisoners, stripped of all their assets. My dad and his mother were sent to live in Siberia. My grandfather was put in a prison in labor camps. Eventually, my father was smuggled to Berlin and later on went to live in Munich. And that's where he met my mom in school when they were 14 years old. And eventually he made it to the States as well. He was an American soldier, a US soldier. He went back to Germany and then stationed there for a couple of years and then came back, went to school. And that's how I ended up in Ridgefield. He was an architect, and he went to, that was his last project was to design a modern home. And he designed it in Ridgefield. And it was the first of its kind because it was California redwood style. And, that wasn't happening in Ridgefield.
And you remember what street?
It was on Norman Road. And I remember, he remembers that the price of the house kept going down because nobody wanted to buy this weird, crazy, California style home. And so they were living in the Bronx and they decided to buy it and move to Ridgefield. And that was it. So.
Wow. Were you always familiar of the story, like in high school? Like, did you understand what they had been through?
So my mother was very open about her experiences. And my mother's parents, my grandparents, and my aunt, because she was lucky enough to survive with her parents and her sister. And so we all grew up, they lived in New Jersey and we all grew up together. My father was a lot more introverted and very private. I knew about his
Mine too, interesting. Mine too, very quiet.
Yeah, we knew the bigger, like the general picture of what happened to him, but he never really spoke about it a lot. I know that he struggled. I know that as an adult, I can see the struggle that he had and the trauma that he experienced. But no, he didn't really talk about it very much. And his family moved. His parents and his sister and his brother lived in Chicago, so we only saw them once a year. So we really didn't have as much exposure to understanding and knowing what they went through. But my mom's story was, and my mom used to speak at schools on Holocaust Remembrance Day. So it was
so important and so smart. It took me really late to really, it was really sort of Schindler's List and my first nephew being born because my mother from a New Jersey hospital on the payphone putting coins in to call Holland to the friend who was basically the daughter of the people who saved her life and where she lived for 2 years to say her grandchild was born. So it was like all those things connecting and then getting them thankfully getting both of my parents to speak to the Shoah Foundation.
Mhm.
You learned more, and I'm, really since that moment, my sister and I have been incredibly close with the granddaughters and family who took my mother and grandmother in, two strangers,
Wow.
in 1943, where they lived for 2 years. And I say it all the time, but I would not be speaking to either of you if not for that family. It's incredible. Matan, were you aware of all of this growing up?
Yeah, I was also because that my grandmother was she was very open about it, and she also moved to Israel when I was very young, so we had her around all the time, but also just in general in school here, and it's definitely something that's talked about. Obviously, they adapted a little bit for children, but at once a year there's the Holocaust Remembrance Day, where the whole country um, sort of stops and listens to stories of survivors, and and so it was definitely something that I was aware of. And as I got older, I mean, I was exposed to more information and more details about what happened, especially with my grandma. So that was.
And every high school senior, until Corona, until COVID, every high school senior spent a week in Poland. It was part of, before graduation, every school took the seniors on a class trip. And I actually accompanied my oldest daughter. There was a parallel parents tour. And that was the first time I'd been there. And I remember my mom wanting to come, struggling with, should she come, shouldn't she come? She was really struggling inside whether she should or shouldn't. In the end, she wasn't physically strong enough to go, and I went. And that was a very powerful experience for me as well. And then especially coming back to Israel. So it's definitely part of the narrative, the culture, the basis of what this country was built upon, for sure.
It's interesting because I don't think I really liked social studies and history in high school. And I wonder if part of that was not wanting to hear this. I don't know really. But today I want to learn as much as I can, and, doing this and share. And I don't think, I mean, we learned about World War II, but I don't know how much we've truly learned about the Holocaust in high school. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember at all. I remember learning about American history. I don't remember at all learning about, and that's the irony here is, here we've always said that the kids learn a lot about Jewish history, but it's really important, and that's where we sort of filled in. We've had the privilege, because our kids are being raised as Israelis, but Americans as well, with a lot of American culture, that we've been able to sort of help develop that as well, and teach them the history. But I don't remember that at all, actually. I don't remember anything, actually.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Well, you talked about the summer camp that offered the gap year in Israel. Can you talk about what that year was like living on a moshav? And is a moshav the same as a kibbutz? But before I let you speak, this was your going away party.
Hey!
Before you left for Israel.
Look at everybody. Wow, we were so young.
So young. So
The
young.
original friends.
1985, I think that is. August of
I
85.
want to hear that picture.
Okay, now. Exactly. My girls just can't get over the height of my hair. They're just like, what would you call that exactly? It was in. What can I tell you? That was
It was in. I had big hair in high school. Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, my experience in Israel. So the year was divided into 4 parts, actually. The first part, I lived on a kibbutz for 3 months. And then I lived on a moshav for a month. And then I studied for 3 months in Jerusalem. And then I volunteered in Nazareth, actually, teaching English in a community school, in a mixed Arab Israeli school in Nazareth for the last few months. And it was interesting. I think first and foremost, it was my first time being away from home for that long. And then to come here, where I guess there's an assumption, there's so many Americans living in Israel, so it would be just like America. But Israel is a Middle Eastern country in every way, and the culture is very different. So that took a bit of getting used to, but it was wild. The first 3 months, a kibbutz basically is a collective community where everything is divided equally. All decisions are made equally. Everyone has the same pay. From the original kibbutzim, the kibbutzim, you have everything, clothing, food, everything is distributed to everyone equally. And whereas a moshav is more privatized, it's still a community living together, sharing one sort of parcel of the land. And they might even share the same kind of agriculture or similar businesses, but everybody has their own home and their own stipend and they can make their own decisions, personal decisions, on how they want to live. Whereas on a kibbutz, everybody's considered equal.
What an incredible experience.
It was.
A year out of high school. I mean,
it was on kibbutz. The kibbutz I lived on was all the way in the south near Eilat. I mean, remember the state of Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So as a country, it's not very big, but I was all the way down south, about, I'd say 40 minutes north of Eilat, which is the southernmost part of Israel. And there I did things in my life. I climbed date trees. I picked dates. I worked in agriculture. I did things I probably physically would never have done. Worked the farm, worked the land. It was really fun. And then the Moshav family that I lived with, they grew flowers, roses actually. And so I learned how to work in greenhouses and do that. And then Jerusalem is just an amazing city, and studying there was great. But I do think the highlight for me was living up north and teaching. I lived in an absorption center and I taught English to elementary school kids. And then in the afternoon, there were projects where they have a big Arab population and Jewish population. And so I worked at an after school program there too. And that was really something. That was
I don't
fun.
think there's anything better to really, educate yourself than leaving home and put into those environments at a young age. I love that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I didn't speak the language, so that was really the first 3 months. We had intense Hebrew immersion, which I really didn't pay attention so much. So I was more into having fun, and I've always been an active learner. Sort of put me in a job or put me somewhere, and that was great. Look, you know what else is really exciting is that growing up in America and learning about Jewish history and learning about Israel and the Bible and things like that, that was reading from a book. And then I came to Israel, and everywhere you go, you're living history. You're actually living history. So, going to Jerusalem and going to the old city, I think it's remarkable. It's like, wow.
I've only been there once in 2010. We had to come for a wedding in Tel Aviv and spent time in Jerusalem, and it was incredible. And I'd love, I definitely want to come back. I mean, it was an incredible experience.
Yeah.
Sad it took me that long to get there. But Matan, I'd love to hear from you. You and your 3 siblings were all born and raised in Israel in a suburb 20 minutes north of Tel Aviv. You each attended summer camp in the U.S., all speak English and Hebrew. How would you describe your childhood in Israel?
So, I mean, first of all, my childhood in Israel was incredible. Also, looking back at it now, I really can appreciate how amazing it is to grow up here. And I'm not just saying that because I actually believe that. We went to camp in the States and in Canada, and so I know, from other people my age, how they grew up, and it's not very foreign to me. I mean, we're sort of like Israeli-American, American-Israeli, whatever you want to call it. And so I know sort of what it's like to live here and what it's like for my cousins or my friends to live there. And what I really, really appreciate, I think, the most about growing up in Israel is the independence that you have. I mean, from a very, very young age, um, there's sort of, I mean, we're all exposed to the difficult um, environment that we're in, and so there's war and terrorism and stuff like that. So you do feel that as a kid, and there is a sort of tension, but it's nothing compared to the sense of community, I think, that you feel here, and there's just this like overall warmth that you get, and anywhere you go, you feel free to be Jewish and to be who you are, and you're not afraid to practice your religion, and not even more than that, just to be, I think one of the best things for me is holidays, and that's like when we're in the States for holidays, we visit our family often. It feels very, very strange because in Israel, everything shuts down and everybody comes together and families come together and you have meals, and the whole country, sort of turns into like this one giant family, and it's really, really something special. And whenever we were in the States, it's always like it's weird. Like, you go to synagogue and you have dinner with your family, but then you go outside and it's just life as usual.
Mm-hmm. Great description of that. You and two of your siblings have all completed your your initial Army service. What were you responsible for initially on the initial round of service, and talk about some of the events that shaped your time serving Israel?
So in Israel, there's a mandatory service. It's 2 to 3 years, depending on the situation. But
what's going on in the country at the time, or
mostly depending on the job, or depending on what you're doing. It used to be that men had to do 3 years and women had to do 2 years, and they're trying to make that.
Now I think women serve 2 years and 8 months,
2.5,
and men do 2 years and 8 months. That's a minimum, depending on the job, right?
So I went in late. I did a gap year, and then I drafted. I was in the Air Force. I was in the spokesperson's unit of the Air Force, and we were responsible for all of the media relations between the Air Force and mostly international media. That was my role because of my English, and so it was everything from press releases, both writing them and translating them. I have very strong English and Hebrew because I grew up here, but I have my American parents, and so that was mostly my job. But there was also running social media, and that's become very, very big. I mean, it's a central part of the media in general. I mean, that's how people are exposed to the news now. So there was a lot of that, and also media coordination. So that there were a lot of exercises. One of the most, I guess, one of the most significant events during my service was a large international exercise where about eight or nine air forces from around the world all came to Israel for 2 weeks, and they trained together. They did a lot of training together. Everyone was on a base together down south, and so I was there I was coordinating the media because it was a very public event and it was a very big deal. And that was really, really special. And I think one of the best parts of it was how much the other air forces admired the Israeli Air Force, which was, I mean, I had always known that we have a very powerful army, and that for different reasons. I mean, we we have one of the best air forces in the world, but I never really felt it until I met, other people who are also, they're professionals, and they know a little bit about air forces, and they were just like amazed. They saw us as like these, and it's pretty crazy because I mean we're also all much younger than they are. They're professional militaries, and everyone's in their 20s, early 20s. So that was also a little shocking. And then I think another really, really meaningful event. It was the last round of fighting with Hamas before this war. So it was May 2021, and I had always experienced these rounds of fighting as a kid or a teenager growing up in Israel, and they happened every year or so. There would be rockets, and we would fight for a few days, and then there would be a ceasefire. And then in May, I was in the Air Force headquarters when it started, and to feel for the first time the power of the Air Force, and the fact that really to feel what war is like. You don't really understand it until you're there and in it. And I wasn't even on the ground. I mean, I was at the headquarters, but still, you really feel it's war. It's really, it's not a nice thing. And also I guess now it's a little bit different, but I sort of got a better understanding of Hamas during that time, and of what we're up against, and also I mean being there also. So there's another part of everyone. There's this, people say that we're the most moral army in the world, which I mean mostly means that that we do everything we can not to target civilians. Mm-hmm. And that in Gaza it's extremely, extremely complicated because it's such a densely populated area, and because that Hamas really hides behind its people. Mm-hmm. For the first time, I actually saw, I mean, with my own eyes, I was there. I saw how much effort goes into to minimizing that kind of civilian harm, and
innocent casualties.
Yeah, innocent casualties. And I mean, it's really difficult, but to the point where we would compromise our own missions on a regular basis, pretty often, if it meant there was a risk of hurting someone who wasn't involved. And so that, I mean, it's surprising because like you see these terrorists operating from a school, and that they're going to shoot rockets at your own people, at your own. I mean, they shoot rockets at cities with millions of innocent Israelis, and you see that, and you can't do anything about it because it's a school, and there are other civilians in the area. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me.
I think all of what is happening is so complicated, and understanding it, and that's why I really appreciate you both sharing it from your perspective. Speaking of Hamas and now the current war, whoever, either of you, can you describe life in Israel before the events of October 7th unfolded?
Do you want to start? Sure. I mean, it was pretty.
Rocks is
no. So I mean, as I said, there were for about 16 or 17 years since we left the Gaza Strip. I mean, our military left the Gaza Strip. There are no more Israelis there. There haven't been for 17 years. So since then, Hamas took over. Hamas is a very, very radical Islamist group. They're very similar to the Islamic State, to ISIS, and since then they've been sort of trying to they've been launching attacks on Israel on a very, very regular basis, mostly shooting at civilians, shooting rockets at people's homes, but also coordinating attacks within Israel. And so every year or so, there would be this round of fighting where we would either go in by foot or from the air, and we would attack Hamas, and it would create this sort of deterrence. It would create a little bit of quiet for about a year, and then they would come up again and start shooting, and it would happen every single year. And that was sort of the idea was that that we can fight every year or so, or every 2 years, and for a few days, and then they'll be quiet, and that Hamas eventually, that they want what's best for their people. That was the conception or the misconception, and that if enough of their people don't want war, if Gazans, then they won't. And if they know that that firing at Israelis and that continuing with their terrorist activities brings the Israeli army to come in, then that would deter them from continuing. But we were very wrong, and it was a big slap in the face, October 7th.
I think that relatively that's an overall sort of history over what's been happening. I'd say the last 2 years in Israel, last year in Israel had been a very difficult one as well. It was not the first time that Israelis and the country and the government, there's been a divide, but it was probably, since I've been here, the most serious and intense political tension, where the country, and I think that's when they talk about Israel's secret weapon, is what we saw sort of after October 7th, was where the entire country was polarized. Leading up to October 7th, the country was completely polarized the year before by what was happening in the government's extreme stance, and it was definitely hurting the society, the collective society, and the culture as a whole. Which some people say, we were distracted by what was happening here, and that's what's going on. But the truth is that over the past, like Matan said, life here in Israel is sort of, we live sort of in the present, definitely working on building a very strong future. Unlike, no different than any other country in the world, you have your internal challenges, but I think that in Israel we have external threats and challenges that are different than most countries. And I think that's kind of misunderstood. So for the most part, though, Israelis, we get on with it. Life for us, generally, we're very fortunate. We live in a safe area, northern suburb of Tel Aviv. And like Matan said before, there's a lot of freedom, personal freedom, safe feeling of safety, security. But there's never this sort of, where everyone's aware, knowing that there's something going on. And even from 2017, when we started to learn that Hamas, they were building tunnels that would reach underneath settlements in the south, there's always been that fear. And even for us today, when the sirens go off, we have 1 minute and 30 seconds. We have 1.5 minutes to get into our shelter, whereas friends of ours who live in the south have 15 seconds. And my cousin who lives in Ashkelon, his apartment had a direct hit, and he hasn't been able to go back home. So there's always this sense of, normalcy, but if you sort of zoom out, it's not really normal, because there's this constant underlying of, well, what's going to happen first? Is there going to be something with, Hezbollah in the north, or is there going to be something out of Gaza? Is there going to be something in Judea Shomron? It's a very, there is an underlying tension, although I think overall Israelis tend to just get on with it, because this is part of our existence, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's something, and thank you both for sharing that. I mean, I see it, on the news. I have never lived that. I don't know what living that would be like. I started this because of what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia,
Mhm.
um, and the uh, individuals screaming, "Jews will not replace us," was an image that I thought if my mother was alive would have sent her, under the bed. Like she definitely, like you said, they lived their lives and we all understood anti-Semitism still existed. But those events in 2017 really woke me up to a new form that I had not visually seen.
Mhm.
And, thinking about what my mother would have thought watching the Ukrainian war unfold, because it was visually, like for me, it was as if I was seeing what she lived through at that point.
Right.
And then October 7th hit, and I thought that, would have just, it was horrifying to see here, and to know that 78 years after World War II, that, the amount of Jews killed was more than any other time since that moment.
I think I remember my mom when she moved here when she was 73 years old. And I remember one year we went up north for the weekend and we were staying sort of at a bed and breakfast, and there was some infiltration or some siren that we heard from the north, or we heard that we were told to stay in our rooms. And I looked for my mom and I found her under the bed. And I was shocked. And my kids, I don't think anyone ever forgot it. They just walked in there like, why is Safta? They called her Safta. Why is she? What happened? What's going on? And it was this immediate, this automatic reaction in her. And my mother was one of the most optimistic, positive, forgiving people impressive. I mean, I truly learned so much about resilience from her, and understanding and tolerance from her. But to see that and to understand, like, this isn't normal. This is not supposed to be happening in your home,
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because I mean, I really did think of my mother,
literally.
my mother smoked 3 packs a day that, till the day she died, basically. And I fully a result of that trauma, I am sure. Hannah, when you and I spoke a month ago, you shared how you learned of the events on October 7th. If you both, Hannah, if you want to start, and Matan share, waking up to this horrifying news.
So I had just returned. Actually, I'd been in the States. I was in Boston and New York for a couple of weeks, and I got back on Monday. I guess the war started Saturday. So I got back on Monday, and I was in the process of moving my Matan sister, my daughter, Eliana, to Jerusalem to start university. So Thursday night, like, we moved her in, and I came back to run on a Friday, and the kids were going to come home, Matan and Avital, my oldest, and Eliana, and we were going to go see Bruno Mars perform in Tel Aviv on Saturday night. And it was the end of the holiday. And I actually remember thinking, I wonder what are the chances of him not performing? Because I was so jet lagged and I really wasn't into it so much, but never wanted it to be because of this. Anyway, I remember going to sleep Friday night, and I was really jet lagged. So I was going to bed. I finally fell asleep at 4:00. And then at 6:30 in the morning, the sirens went off. And it's one of those things after living here for 30 years that, my body just automatically knew what to do, even though I didn't know what I got up and I was sort of out of it, but my body just instinctively knows now how to react to that sound. And we all went down. We have a bomb shelter in our home, and we went into our bomb shelter, and we were all half asleep and not really understanding what was going on, and figured it must just be, sometime maybe it's a mistake or something, or they were doing a test that we didn't know about or something like that.
Or another short round of fighting.
Or most likely
Right.
another short fighting. And, given where we live, okay, we're relatively safe. We'll stay. So we stayed in our shelter for 10 minutes, the required time. And then I went back to sleep. And then my son, Alon, who was studying in Boston, he called me and he said to me about 2 hours later, and he said, first he started texting. I started hearing my phone, but I was exhausted and I slept, and then I saw he called and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. Why? Why?" And he said, "Well, what's happening now in Israel? Are you okay? And I said, yeah, there was an alarm, but I think it was just, there's probably something down south going on, but I'm sure it's nothing. I said, I'm really can we talk in an hour? And he said, I really think you need to get up. And so that's what I did. And then I was waiting for, anyway, I turned on the news and I saw what was happening. And I went downstairs to the other kids, and there are no words to describe what the rest of that day and the first few days afterwards were like for all of us. It was just complete and utter shock, a feeling for the first time in my life and the first time living in Israel. I felt personally unsafe and vulnerable. And like you were saying before, like now you wondered what your family felt like. I actually felt, we felt very vulnerable, and we had no idea, and it was just chaos, and it was just so unbelievable because you would never think that could happen here in Israel. And there was it was utter confusion, just confusion and shock.
Matan, before you share, do most Israelis have a bomb shelter in their home?
So now every new home that is built or apartment building has to legally have a bomb shelter
or a safe room.
They have a lot of homes still don't. I mean, the majority of homes still don't, because a lot of the buildings were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when that wasn't really a threat, a serious threat. But now there are, and there are some cities where they'll have community shelters or like neighborhood shelters. So, which is also not really helpful if you're in your home and you only have 60 seconds to get there. So it's I mean, on the one hand, you have somewhere to go, and there's air defense, but it's still terrifying.
I can't even imagine, I'm sure. And thank you. I was unaware. I mean, I know Hannah had said you have a shelter, but I was curious about others in Israel. You were at home and mom woke you up as well, Matan?
No, yeah. So I actually I had gotten up about 10-15 minutes before it started, because I was getting ready to go for my long run. I run, and here, the Sunday long run is on Saturday, because Sunday we have work and school and everything. So I was actually brushing my teeth, and then I heard the siren, and I mean, personally, I have a little bit of trauma with rocket attacks, and so I immediately went into shock, and I started yelling for everyone to come downstairs, and then we went downstairs, and then I calmed down a little bit, but I sort of thought to myself, all right, so this is going to be another, like I said, another few days of fighting. There might be, we might have killed one of their senior terrorists or whatever, and so they're responding. There were I was just making up a lot of, trying to figure out what was going on. And then when they all went to sleep, or she went back to sleep, which I understand, because I mean, most people here do after a siren. I stayed up and I was following the news, and I don't think I've ever felt so terrified in my life. It was the worst few hours I have ever experienced, and hopefully the worst few hours I will ever experience, because hearing about the amount of terrorists who were coming in and just going door to door and raping and murdering, and it was just and thinking that, knowing that a lot of my friends are combat soldiers, that they I mean, at 7 a.m., half an hour after it started, were already on their way down south to fight. And the uncertainty of, I didn't know if my friends would be alive by sunset. That was really terrifying.
And that was, there was so much confusion, and we were trying to keep track of people. So the initial reaction was find out where everybody is. And for example, Eliana's, my daughter Eliana, her boyfriend, who was home from, he's an officer in the Army, he's in a combat unit. And he was supposed to come Saturday afternoon, and he was going to come with us to the concert. And he was home, and he immediately got the call at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, and he went down there. And we've found out recently in the last few weeks what he experienced on that day, which no 24-year-old would ever have to experience. He was part of a group of soldiers that went in to try to save Israelis in Kfar Aza, Kibutz Kfar Aza, and
there was no one to save.
There was no one to save, and he fought 10 meters with terrorists, and so all day long it was between watching the news, trying to connect with our friends whose children are fighting. Are they home? Are they safe? And to try to connect with friends and family who live down south, live in these border communities. And the entire country was on lockdown. It was complete lockdown. So much so that they were telling us, do not leave your home. Do not, if they come, if someone rings your doorbell, if the army or the police come and they say, we're here, the police, we're checking, do not let anyone in. I mean, the entire country was in lockdown because no one had any idea what was going on.
Right. And Hannah, you shared there's not a single person in Israel who hasn't been affected by this tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And those first few days and weeks, I know you said it was, having to attend funeral after funeral. I mean,
it was something
how do you look back at that period and what you were experiencing and the grief that the country was feeling?
Well, first of all, no one was out on the streets. It was a complete ghost town. It was as if, imagine COVID in the very beginning when no one was out. I don't know what it was like in America, but I know from what I read.
New York City, I have friends who have pictures of New York City deserted, which you have never seen.
So here you have to understand, this is holiday season in Israel. The height of this, I mean, for the entire first week, the only place you could find people were funerals. That Saturday afternoon, we have very close friends who live in the north, and their daughter lives in the town next to us, and she was called emergency to go to the army. She's in an intelligence unit. And so they asked me but it wasn't safe to go out. Nobody knew what was going on. So I picked her up from her apartment and I drove her they were organizing shuttles to take soldiers either up north or down south. And so she was supposed to go up north. So when I went out on the road, it was like something from from a movie, Apocalypse. There was no one out. You could hear in the background, you could hear planes and things. And then I was on the road, and the only cars you saw on the road were emergency vehicles, army vehicles, or buses taking soldiers, shuttling them, or parents taking their children to bus stops. And I remember dropping her off at this bus stop, and I held her, and I didn't want to let go of her because I didn't know if I would see her again. And then I came home, and the next day, it was just a nightmare. And the next morning I woke up, and the first news I heard walking out of my bedroom was that one of Matan's, one of his best friend's brothers had been killed Saturday in one of the fights in one of the kibbutzim down south. And these are friends of ours. We know them from the States. His parents are American. And then it continued day after day, where I would get a phone call saying, so-and-so's son died, so-and-so's daughter was injured. But most importantly, I attended the first week many funerals, so much so that they ran out of flowers to make wreaths because there were so many funerals, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And it was just, I've never seen anything like it. I can't even now describing it. I don't feel like I'm even giving it the.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And I'm sorry, Matan, 24, that you're having to see all of this and experience this. And I know you've been called back, correct? You're back serving. Are you in the same role?
Yeah, I'm in the same role. The work is a lot more intense. I mean,
right, because as you described, what was happening previously when you served was sporadic fighting.
right.
Now, from October 7th, it has been constant.
Yeah, it's been constant, and it's been a lot more intense, and it's also something that sort of gets swept under the rug. You know, it gets missed is that it's not just in Gaza. I mean, Gaza is the main. It's the center of the war right now. But I mean, our northern border is completely covered in Iranian proxies. One of them, Hezbollah, which is a much more powerful terrorist organization than Hamas. And they've been they saw this as an opportunity to try and drag us into another war so that we have two fronts. And so there's that, and then there's another threat in the south with the Houthis in Yemen, who all of a sudden started shooting at us. And so it's just this. I mean, in the round of fighting in the war that I told you about in 2021, I think there were a total of about 4,000 rockets shot at Israel. And when I say shot at Israel, they don't really shoot them at bases or at military. They just shoot them wherever, at cities and so in the first day of this war on October 7th, they shot about 4,500 rockets in the first few hours, and in 11 days of the 2021 war, they only shot about 4,000. And so just the numbers, I mean, it was like, so even at the funerals, I mean, the funerals, a lot of them were interrupted by missile warnings. And
that's what they would say. They would bring in the coffin and prepare for burial. And the first thing they announced was, in the event of a siren, and they gave us instructions on how to evacuate. And that's been the norm.
I mean, till today. There's still,
Just the other day, we were on Thursday at lunchtime at 12 o'clock. We hadn't had a siren in Ra'anana for about a month. For about a week or two. And at 12 o'clock, from nowhere, we had.
Well, I know when we spoke, you had to get off the phone because it happened. Matan, I'm curious because you spoke of sort of the trauma of this and previous. Is there something that helps? I mean, I can't imagine, Hannah, coming from our town in Richfield and being 24 and having to do this. And, thankfully, I know there's mental health professionals, that people use, because this is not how 24-year-olds should be living their lives.
Yeah. So there's going to be a serious problem in the future. I mean, right now it's kind of hard to. A lot of Israelis, including myself, I haven't really processed the enormity of. I mean, it's a different scale, and we haven't had time to process it because we've been in self-defense. We've been at war, and the first thing that everyone tells you, especially combat soldiers, when they're in there, they ask them, are you scared or and they don't have a choice. They can't really think about what happened, and they can't really process it because they have to focus on what's going on now. So everyone always says after the war we'll have time to mourn and we'll have time to get over our trauma, but now is war. But as I think you both have described and given me a picture into the Israeli community, it feels that you will be surrounded by people who will help you through that.
So what they're doing now, one of the things that they recognized is that there's the tremendous need that this will be, and unfortunately, I mean, I hate to say it, but I know we talked a lot during COVID about a generation of trauma. But in Israel, it's already a known thing that this will be, and unfortunately, their generation of a tremendous amount of generational trauma. And Israel's already started. I'm actually working with supporting. There's a EMDR training program, and so we're helping to try to raise awareness and support to train more healthcare workers, so that, and they've started already. They started with survivors of the music festival and survivors. Yeah. So immediately within the first week, most of the mental health care workers in the country, everything was shifted to helping the displaced families and survivors and families of hostages. And soldiers will come. That's the next round of support and help. And they're developing now new trauma centers in Israel, just specifically for this situation, for the day after. So it's not only the day after of what happens the day after collectively, but from an emotional health and mental health point of view, because they understand now the idea of trauma, of this kind of trauma.
I am thrilled to hear that, because I think about your mother and father and my mother and father, and how, the slightest bit of that could have helped them all have a better experience.
Just a safe place. Yeah. No, it's on a different scale. And I think generally the world now is more aware and understanding and accepting of what mental health, the importance of mental health, and how it has to be a priority. It has to be a priority for all of us.
100%. You talked to me about the normal way of life that you all experienced before the war is over. And it's going to be a while before you feel normal again. Is there anything you'd want folks here in America or American Jews to understand that we might not have touched on?
I personally, I find it very hard when the masses of people, especially in Europe and in the States, are calling for, they keep saying ceasefire now, and this has to stop, and I don't think they realize. I don't think a lot of people realize that we want a ceasefire. I mean, it's not like
we're not benefiting from this.
Nobody. We don't enjoy waking up every morning at 6 a.m. to the updated list of
how many soldiers.
Casualties.
I mean, we don't enjoy. We also don't enjoy. I get sick every time I see about I see or hear about what's going on to Palestinians who, in Gaza, who lost everything because Hamas uses their house or their neighborhood as a base for terrorist attacks, and it's really devastating. But on the other hand, if a ceasefire will just a ceasefire pretty much means supporting the status quo and saying, we'll stop now, and the death will stop for a little bit, and the suffering will stop. But in a few years, it'll just be back
for another possible surprise.
And it's not even a matter of if, because it's been going on for so long, and also, their leaders are saying that they want to do it again. They're not even hiding it. And so I when I hear the word ceasefire now, as much as I really want there to be peace, and I don't want the fighting to continue at all, there can't be a ceasefire. We can't tolerate a situation that, a reality in which we aren't safe in our own homes, and we can't tolerate a reality in which Palestinians are used as shields. It's devastating and it's terrible. And so the only way for there to be a real ceasefire is for Hamas to either put down their weapons, or for us to do it for them, because we've tried every other solution. For years now, we've even been paying Hamas there are people who are for it or against it, but we've even been paying them so that, they won't attack, to sort of try and incentivize them not to fight, and nothing has worked. And unfortunately, this is what has to be done, and it's going to take a while. And
sorry.
No, that's it. That's
yeah.
I personally feel like that question or is connected to why we started this conversation in the beginning about anti-Semitism.
Right. Their goal, Hamas's goal in their charter is to eliminate the people of Israel.
Right. And it's not just Hamas's charter.
Right.
I think that before we can, and you said, what's my message? I think that to zoom out, to always, number one, I think what Matan is saying is correct. It's when you live it, it's a very different experience than when you hear about it. I remember my son's in Boston, and I've been calling frantically for the past few months, terrified that something might happen to him there, and college campus. And I remember saying, but it's okay. It's not what you're hearing there, and it's not as extreme, or it is extreme, but it's not happening where I am right now. Or, and I think the same goes both ways. I think that the news and the media distorts information, and there is no doubt there is tremendous destruction, devastation, suffering, loss of human life that on such a large scale that is impossible to justify, very difficult to justify. And with that, and I'm talking about loss of life for all of us, not just, I don't look at
Israelis, Palestinians.
Right. I mean, we're human beings. And I think, again, maybe my perspective of being a child of a Holocaust survivor is that I look at human life as human life. And I don't look at, where your passport is from or what your circumstance. This is, unfortunately, these are the circumstances. The Middle East is a volatile area, and it's complicated, and it's very upsetting to see what's going on. But at the root of it, I think before we can talk about the how things should be, I think what needs to be established and remembered and discussed and never forgotten is the what. And number one, I believe truly the what is that the recognition of Israel's right to exist as a free country, as a safe country, just like America, just like England, just like Germany, like every other country in the world. And for some reason, and again, that's what I feel goes back to the whole beginning of our conversation of anti-Semitism is, for some reason, for whatever reason, we are held to a different set of rules than everyone else in the world. And the only explanation I can give is connected on some level to this sense of anti-Semitism, this feeling of hatred or I don't know what. So for me, I think the message is to remember first and foremost that yes, we all bear responsibility, all of us, each and every one of us, and each and every one of us have a choice every single day of our lives what to do with that. And what I do on a personal level, and what I do is I've taught my children the value of human life and respect and tolerance, and I've sent them out into the world now, and hopefully, and we surround ourselves with people in community that are doing not just talking but walking their talk. But I believe first and foremost the recognition that it can't be that what happened on October 7th is should be a reminder or in context of any kind. Nothing can justify what happened on October 7th.
No one. And you both expressed to me off camera, education is so important. People need to educate themselves. So many people have repeated, I'm not even going to say it, the line about, people just need to educate themselves to understand what is truly happening before they speak up, choose a side, or partake in any form of protest about what is currently happening.
Right.
Like you said, Hannah, you are living it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really it. I think that I don't think it's very easy. We're all very excited when we have a platform and we have a place where we can, share opinions and ideas. But to do that, to not be responsible about that, to not understand that your platform holds so much you hold so much, all of us, we all hold responsibility. And first and foremost, it's about facts. The moment you distort a fact, the moment you distort a fact, nothing is ever going to be fairly represented.
Mhm.
And I think that's and also understanding that there's a lot more to it. So even if you're honoring and you're showing that, yes, even my own children were following, influencers who are promoting peace and peace for everyone and peace for, and trying to bring people together. But then when you look at their actual Instagram account, they're not talking that language at all. So I'm saying, so for that one moment that you're posting or you're sharing this post, what you're doing underlying is you're reinforcing something that's perpetuating a different idea and theme. And that's dangerous. I feel like it's a wildfire that's just spreading out of control. And that just feeds into the anti-Semitism, and it doesn't lead people to a place where that's going to be constructive. And I think right now what we need is somehow to find a way to come together for the sake of humanity, and for the future and security of all people in this region, to find a way to be responsible in how we communicate our ideas and our opinions, because we all value life and we all deserve to feel free and safe.
Amen to that. Well said. My last question is going to be for Matan, because you are and have been, as part of your job in the Israeli Defense Force, is speaking sort of to the media, from your vantage point in Israel to here in America to around the world. Is there anything you think the media is doing right? And what would you say they're doing absolutely wrong?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really depends. The media in general, around the world, it often feels like it's sort of like they're constantly looking for a victim, and so, I mean, we saw it after the few days after October 7th. The media was very, very focused on Israel and on our what was going on here. And then as the time went on, people start to forget, and images of come out of Gaza and the destruction and what's going on, and it sort of switches. And I think one of the main issues with the media is that it's not black and white. It's not a binary situation where you can sort of say, one person is suffering more than the other, and this is the reason, and it's really, really, really complicated, and unfortunately a lot of the international media does not like us so much, and so it's kind of difficult to explain to them why we're doing what we're doing, and that our intentions and our goals are not, to kill people. I mean, we're not bloodthirsty monsters that that we are often portrayed as, and that a lot of the negative, a lot of the lies that are being spread. A lot of people don't understand that it hurts the Palestinians just as much as it hurts us, if not more, because as long as Hamas exists, that there will be war, and and Palestinians will continue to suffer, both from
Mm-hmm.
the Israelis and from their government, and it's never going to end. And so I think what the media doesn't understand is that that they have a huge impact on Palestinian lives, just as much as Israeli lives, when they
I think the realization of like if they show a certain side as victims, as only victims, what it isn't doing is it's not empowering them in any way, empowering all of us to help support them in a positive, in a more proactive way. And I think that, like the example yesterday, I don't even know if it made the news in America, but there's been an issue of humanitarian aid coming in and Hamas terrorists coming in and stealing the aid, and it's complete chaos. So in recent weeks, some of the Gazans were fighting back and like pushing them away, but clearly they could easily get killed and shot by them. And just yesterday, again, terrorists tried to come and steal the aid that was being provided for the Gazans down south who have been moved down south. And there were Israeli soldiers there who killed the terrorists so that the Palestinians would receive their food and not have to do it. Or when the Gazans were being moved down south in a war situation, the Israeli tanks and soldiers were providing safety for them so they could pass through the passage and not be pushed back by Hamas terrorists who were shooting them not as a deterrence not to go down south. So like there are so many different things that happen and occur that probably are never really
right.
because news sells, or for whatever reason, everyone's trying to create their own new narrative. And I think what Matan is saying is exactly right, is that in order to build a safer, better future for all of us, the only thing we can do right now is to eradicate as much as we can what's happening with Hamas, to get rid of them as quickly and to return the hostages.
All terrorist organizations.
Really, but in this particular case, the return of the hostages and
100. We need to pray for that so much.
Absolutely.
I mean, over 100 still, correct? About
129.
129. Yesterday, they found another hostage had been killed in captivity. So that was another one yesterday. But that is the primary goal right now for all of us, is to get our hostages home, back to their families, to protect and try to find a peaceful resolution so that the day after can occur, and that there will be a better future for Gazans and for Israelis. And I think the media there's so much opportunity, and it's just a shame that for whatever reason it just never happens. I feel like with the media we keep taking a step back instead of using every tool in our toolbox to try to help promote a better life, quality of life for so many. It's being misused and
it has been for the last few years, unfortunately.
And I might say, just as an educator, I think the most important part of all of it is that the day after, beyond borders and boundaries, the day after has to include education and has to include building tolerance and learning each other's languages and integrating and inclusion, and only that, and that will take a generation on its own, but it's possible. I do believe that it is possible. And that's where you start. You start with education in children, because that really is the key to the future of changing mindsets and changing narratives.
Well said, Hannah. Matan, Hannah, thank you so much. Is there anything we didn't touch upon that you want to convey?
No, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Alan, for giving us this opportunity. I have to say I was a little bit anxious in the beginning. I didn't know if this is, but it was actually very cathartic and really helpful.
I'm glad. Stay here as I sign off, okay?
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you both. Really, thank you. Thanks everybody for watching. Thank you to Hannah and Matan Schwartz for taking the time and sharing their story with all of us. Let's all pray for peace and the return of the remaining hostages. As I leave you, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the hard thing, and let's fight hate and anti-Semitism for good. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. War is not the answer. Please feel free to share these episodes with your friends and family. Thank you, and until the next conversation.